Well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock, the podcast exploring the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. We do all the research so that you don't have to. This is the part where I would normally say, this is the last podcast series you'll ever need about David Lynch or Dune. But today, that's not the case because we can't do better than what our guest today has done.
We are here today with Max Evry. He's the author of Masterpiece and Disarray, David Lynch's Dune, an oral history. We mentioned it briefly during our Dune episode that came out last week as one of our sources that we used on that. So welcome to the show, Max. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, how you guys doing?
Thank you. I'm glad we got that out of the way.
Hey, just to be
fair,
that was a better joke than any I've had in the entire David Lynch series.
Or the entire 118 episodes of the podcast.
That's true. That's true.
But we do like to say, as Gary was saying, when we make a podcast series on David Lynch or David Fincher or whoever else we like to say that this is the ultimate resource for everything you need to know about how these movies were made. And we try to pull from all these other resources and kind of compile everything into a comprehensive making of. But in the case of Dune, I almost made the joke during the episode, and I don't think I ever did. I was like, well, this is not everything you need to know about Dune because Max has written a comprehensive book about the making of Dune. It's, I think, 518 pages long or something like that. It is a beast. If I ever have anyone break into my house and I'm looking for a weapon, I'm going to smack them over the head with this thing because it'll knock them out. It's a fantastic book though, Max. And we really appreciate you taking the time to come meet with us today and talk about David Lynch's Dune.
Yeah, no, it is quite comprehensive. I think there's 80 pages just on catering. Right?
Oh, wow.
No, there's at least two though.
There's a couple in there. Yeah,
but they had catering problems. They had a lot of problems on this movie.
They had a lot of problems on this movie.
We detail a good portion of them. Yeah, I like to tell people, because the book is 560 pages long.
Wow.
I like to tell people it's longer than the Bible, but with more suffering in the desert.
Yeah, that's only like 2 chapters out of the Bible. So that's a big chunk of Dune's story.
Yeah.
So I guess one of my first questions to you that I was very, very curious about is why Dune? Like, of all the movies to do such an in-depth look at the making of, what drew you to this project in particular?
It's a special movie, and I mean, people say that a lot. But it's no, it really is quite special, especially when you look at it, even looking at it from an 80s perspective, but looking at it from a contemporary perspective, the idea that they pumped the equivalent of over $100 million in today's money to make this, and gave Lynch as much free reign as they did. There was a caveat to that, but
sure.
there was, and he was on a leash, but even on a leash, Lynch really let go and did some incredibly odd things and some incredibly unconventional things with this movie, just the way they're structured and the way they do flashbacks and they do inner monologues. All these things are huge creative swings. And some of them work better than others. Some of them work better in the longer cut, like the Spice Diver fan edit and things like that. But I've actually been able to see the movie twice now with an audience in a theater.
Oh, fun.
And it really is just this unique tapestry of, just incredible production design and amazing costumes and wild characters and it really is kind of a landmark, even though it's not a wholly successful movie. It's certainly not a successful adaptation of the material. I mean, if you want that, definitely go with the Villeneuve movies, because they're far truer to the intent of Herbert. But I feel like David got more the the sense of spirituality that's in the material. Like, Paul does go on a spiritual journey. That wasn't something that was just tacked on by David.
All right.
But that was the thing he honed in on. Yeah, I think there's a lot there to chew on, and I mean, I watched the movie over and over again while I was writing the book, and was still noticing things, and noticing ways that it tied into Lynch's other movies. There's a lot of things he carried over from this into other things. I was just talking today, I was doing the Beetlejuice junket. I was talking to Justin Theroux about how some of his scenes in Mulholland Drive feel very autobiographical to Lynch's experience on Dune. And
oh wow, yeah.
Yeah. Specifically to the point that he's talking to this mobster named Luigi, who looks just like Dino De Laurentiis.
Yeah.
Drinks these cappuccinos just like Dino De Laurentiis.
Is that Angelo's character?
That's Angelo's character. Yeah.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the character's name is Luigi. Dino De Laurentiis' brother is named Luigi.
Oh wow. So very purposeful. Very purposeful. I feel like David Lynch, he does that a lot, where he likes to put a lot of autobiographical elements into his work. And I feel like even on Dune, he was able to, it, like you said, it's not fully successful, but I think it is not as unsuccessful as a lot of like contemporary reviews would have you believe. And it is sort of almost a diluted version of David Lynch's vision, because he was on a leash, like you said, but there are a lot of like Lynchian elements that he was able to sneak in there. I mean, that scene where the navigator is introduced and his fish tank train thing is one of the most bizarre things in any David Lynch movie. Like it is just a weird, surreal moment that no other director would have done, at least, especially not that way,
Yeah. I mean, Villeneuve didn't do it because that character is not in the first book. That character shows up in Dune Messiah.
He's is he referenced in the first book? I can't remember.
He may have been like name checked, but he
doesn't actually show up.
He doesn't show up. They don't show his physical appearance, in which like David kind of elaborated on. Like that character actually looks a lot like the baby in Eraserhead.
Yeah,
I was gonna say, if the baby was able to grow up, this would have been him.
Yeah. Well, there is a scene in Eraserhead where he's giant, like the
giant.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And,
wow, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, and there's of course a great scene. It's one of my favorite scenes in my book where David sees the guild navigator on stage for the first time, and he's like loving it, and then he's like, it needs something. It needs it needs some afterbirth. and he tells Carlo Rambaldi, the Italian designer, he's like, can you get some afterbirth and rub it on it? And Carlo Rambaldi's like, what? And somebody translates it to him in Italian. He's like, what?
What do you want, man? We constantly talk. Yeah, we're like always. I feel like in this show, like when we deep dive into a movie, we end up with multiple movies where we're just like, how did this happen? How did we get there? And this may be, seeing an interview, one of your interviews you did where you mentioned the fact that in today's numbers, this would be like $150 million movie. And really putting that into perspective, when I heard you say that, I was like, wow, how did this movie happen?
Right. Right. Yeah. Because movies today, like they're so like, made in an algorithm, like they're so safe. They have all the edges rubbed off, and and like nothing is meant to startle the audience or put the audience on their guard or off center, and that's David's MO. Like that's where the area he thrives in is making the audience uncomfortable and making pushing the audience's boundaries, especially in terms just of like of consciousness, like his whole thing is like TM. And by the way, I'm not a TM guy, but like his thing is TM. And so that's all about consciousness expansion. And I feel like Dune, the movie, does a very credible job of really pushing the level of imagination that had been brought to the genre up to that point, and even to this day.
Yeah, I mean, there's stuff on screen in this that had never been seen before, even in science fiction. I mean, even in, Star Wars, which had come out, less than a decade before this. I mean, this came out, this is 84, right? So this is a year after Return of the Jedi. So, Star Wars is very fresh in people's mind, and it'd be very easy to crib the look of Star Wars, or of 2001, for that matter. And because Anthony Masters worked on 2001 as well. So it'd be very easy to just pull from that. But instead, David Lynch was like, no, we're going to do something nobody's ever seen before. And that's admirable in itself, I think, because it's like, why do the same thing and someone else has already done? And I feel like that's all that he wants to do in his entire career, is showcase whatever piece of art he's creating in a way that nobody's done before.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, and obviously, like it's unfortunate that the movie came out in the wake of the Star Wars trilogy, because all three of those movies, cribbed extensively from Herbert's book.
From
And
Dune, yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think at the time when just the first two had come out, Star Wars and Empire, like I think Herbert himself said there's at least 16 points of identity, and
Yep.
including the fact that Paul has these twin children, and
And the voice is kind of like the Force, and
the
like,
voice
yeah.
is like the Force,
Mhm.
and yeah, the wind traps and the moisture farming, and there's a million things that it steals even to this day. Like in the most recent one, Rise of Skywalker, the idea that Rey has all these generations of Jedi within her is stolen from the Bene Gesserit.
Yeah, you're right. I hadn't thought about that, but
Yeah.
wow. So
No,
Lucas
they
is still,
amazing.
they
yeah,
don't stop. They don't stop.
that's wild.
Yeah.
One important question I definitely want to get out of the way here with you is, I got to know, how many times do you think you've seen this movie now?
Mm. Well, that's a hard question to answer, because it's like I've seen it from front to back a lot, probably at least 20 times in different iterations. And I'm talking over the years too, because it's like I was into this movie before then too. But yeah, at least a couple dozen times probably. But then there's all the specific scenes that I've watched ad nauseum. Like I've probably seen the scene with the shield training, maybe 40 times or something. Like I love that scene.
Yeah.
Like I think the shields are awesome. I don't think
Yeah.
I don't think they particularly aged. And
Yeah, they're fun.
yeah, and I think there's a lot of just visually really cool um moments in the movie. That the Guild Navigator would be another one. Like that whole beginning of the movie, even though it's just loaded with way too much exposition, um it moves at this pretty impressive clip of not just of pace, but of the number of cool things it's throwing at you. And yeah, it's a very cozy movie. Like
Yeah.
I think some other people have mentioned this too. Like there's sort of like a genre of movies that's like, oh, it's cozy, like The Hunt for Red October. Like
Yeah.
you're in this like submarine, and you're just into the decor in Ramius's quarters or whatever. Like it's the same thing. Like I love being in that room at the beginning with Paul where he's training, like all the wood paneling and everything, and or even the way the Seaches look. Like the Seaches look really cool. Yeah, like I just like living in this movie. Maybe not the maybe not the Harkonnen planet. Like,
Yeah. No, I don't know about that. Yeah, that first half of the movie, I do think I think it works better than the second half. I think the second half like does kind of turn into a series of montages in that last act, but that first half, like I like the pacing of it a lot. I think that yeah, they are throwing a lot of information at you, but it doesn't feel overwhelming somehow to me. And I do just like being introduced to each of the different planets, Gedi Prime and all that stuff, which is that's my favorite one, because it just feels like it's the future of the world that Eraserhead takes place in, is kind of what it feels like to me, like all just steel and oil and steam, and that's it feels like the most Lynchian of the four planets to me. But I love that really the first half of the movie. The second half is a little more hit and miss for me, just because it feels like they're rushing to the finale a little bit, even though there's still fantastic stuff there towards the end.
And I just want to point this out because among film fanatics, there's this frame of mind that a lot of people like to get into, especially people who have never worked in the film industry. They think that every movie is a David and Goliath battle. That it's the plucky young director versus the evil studio. And the reality is, a lot of the times, the director is wrong. And
or they need somebody to reel them in a little bit.
Yeah, or they need somebody. Yeah, and I think with David, a problem you see recurring throughout his career is that he shoots way too much movie. Starting with Eraserhead, like he cut 20 minutes out of Eraserhead after the first couple of screenings, and that was a self-made, sort of student film, and he had the wherewithal to be like, this is too long.
Yeah.
It's too much, and he did the same thing with Blue Velvet.
Blue Velvet was almost 4 hours long, I think, the first cut.
Yeah, and if you see some of that footage, you're like, yeah, we didn't need this. And it's like, yeah, and there's enough footage cut from Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me to make a whole another movie.
Yeah.
Which they did.
Yeah.
And so like, yeah, and I think that's that sort of eyes bigger than his mouth thing came up with Dune too, and it's like, the movie he shot was like 4.5 hours before visual effects. So it's like, yeah, it was just too much. Like he was trying to be too true to the book.
Yeah.
And he acknowledged that, it's why he wrote some scenes specifically to bridge, and like, compress it down, and some of those were really smart, sort of a truncations. Is that a word? Truncations.
Yeah.
Of the material. And but then I don't think he wanted, the last third of the movie to be mostly montages.
Right. Yeah. I'm sure.
I don't think he intended as much of Virginia Madsen's narration. And he certainly didn't intend for the voiceover to be used as a Band-Aid.
Yeah, because there was a little bit of that in the script, if I recall, right?
Yeah, I think he said it's something like it's 50-50. Like 50% of those voiceovers that you hear were scripted and intended, and the other 50% were just thrown in by the editors.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, let's explain this. And it's like they wind up explaining some things like multiple times.
Yeah,
it starts to get redundant. Like they were definitely frightened of an audience not being able to just let this movie wash over them. Like I think the thing that's the greatest about Lynch's movies, certainly far superior to the Villeneuve in this respect, is that Herbert's book is all about throwing you in media res to this world, this millennia in the future, all this different nomenclature and culture and politics and all that, like in these different worlds, and he's throwing you in. And you have to kind of pick it up as you go. Oh, this must mean this, and that I think I understand this. Like you have to be intuitive about it.
Yeah, using context clues and
Yeah, and I think Lynch was really leaning into that. Like even in the final cut, the theatrical cut, which is pretty compromised and over-explaining, there's still a lot that feels very intuitive, where you kind of are making sense of it as it goes along, as opposed to having it spoon-fed.
So there are some other cuts to this. You mentioned the Spice Diver cut earlier, and I know you've got a chapter on that cut in the book. I haven't seen the Spice Diver cut. I'm sure a quick Google search would probably get me a copy of it if I wanted to. But what do you think of that cut in general? Like, I've heard a lot of people think it's the superior cut. But it is just a fan edit, right? It's just a fan edit.
Yeah, like there should be an asterisk to that, because it's like it's the superior cut, but there's only one cut that David Lynch actually approved having his name on.
Right.
It's the theatrical cut.
Right.
Anything else is not really his vision, and that extends to Spice Diver because, that's not it wasn't like a situation on Touch of Evil where the editors were literally had like a 57-page guide written by Orson Welles saying this goes here, this goes there, da 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 da. Like Spice Diver was using different script drafts and kind of making his own decisions about where they all should go. And I will tell you, as somebody who did a commentary track on the Via Vision Blu-ray of the extended TV cut, which is awful, don't watch it.
I mean, yeah, I haven't seen it.
I mean, like what you can watch it with my commentary, but that version is an abomination because the people who were putting that together, bless their hearts, didn't give a fuck.
You're right.
Like they were just throwing shots in from everywhere, here, there. Oh, we need to fill a shot here. Boom. It's like it's a mess.
Yeah.
Like there's whole scenes that are like a half hour later than they were supposed to be.
Oh wow.
It's awful. And the thing that Spice Diver did this is the difference is Spice Diver really cared.
Yeah.
He really wanted it to be as close to what he thought David's vision was.
Yeah.
And so and I think it's great. It's like you get to, it's a much more coherent movie. It has more of the story. If you've only seen the Villeneuve movies, you'll see a lot more scenes from the Villeneuve movies in the Spice Diver cut, like the fight with Jamis, all that type of stuff. But he had his own very specific vision, and like there's some things that I don't think should be in there that are in there. And like, I even discovered a lost scene in the process of writing the book with Molly Rinn, who was an actress who was more or less cut completely out of the film, and she had this scene on VHS that nobody had ever seen before, and me and my friend Matt Karen very painstakingly had it restored to 4K and cleaned up, and we put the blue and blue eyes in. We added music to it, and I asked Spice Diver, I'm like, do you want like a high quality copy of this scene to put in this back in the Spice Diver cut? And he's like, no, I don't think it helps the flow of the movie. And I'm like, okay. So that's the kind of guy Spice Diver is. Spice Diver has his own vision.
Yeah.
And I think for the most part, it's pretty darn successful. And it's the closest thing, this is the important part, it's the closest thing we have now to a proper version.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes me think of the assembly cut of Alien 3 a little bit. It's like, it's not a director's cut. It's not even, it's not David Lynch or David Fincher in that case did not approve it or have anything to do with it. But based on what they knew that he wanted to do, it's kind of like the closest thing they could assemble. Only in that case, it was, of course, done by 20th Century Fox and not by a fan. But it feels very similar in that way, where we're like, we know this isn't the director's cut, but we're just trying to do this material justice as best we can, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, it was super. The assembly cut, I believe, was supervised by Charles de Lauzirika, who's a friend of mine, and
nice.
He's about as big an alien fan as you can possibly get.
Yeah, I do think it's this. I think that's the superior cut of Alien 3 personally, but it's still a flawed film. But
I do
definitely.
Too, I gotta say, I loved your guys' episode of Alien 3. If the listeners haven't heard it yet, please go listen to that. It's one of the best summations of.
Well, thank you.
That masterpiece in disarray. Like it's
of course.
And there are a lot of parallels between that film and Dune and the process that Fincher went through. I personally I like both cuts of Alien 3. I think it's a really cool movie just because like it feels like a British murder mystery.
Yeah. That's a great way of looking at it.
It's like an episode of Midsummer Murders or something.
Yeah. With half the cast of Withnail and I in it.
I love Withnail and I like all those guys are really good. It's like I can understand the first time watching that movie, like it's a bunch of British bald guys running around. You can't tell who that are. But it's like now that I've watched it a bunch of times, it's like, that's fucking Pete Postlethwaite, and that's
Yeah,
like this guy, and
he's
that's this
great.
guy. And it's like they're all like really good actors.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah, and it's unrelentingly grim, and that's I think the thing that is always gonna bug fans about that movie, you know,
Yeah.
no matter what version it's in. Whereas the David Lynch's Dune is actually a much happier spin on the Paul Atreides story. You know, which if you know, if you just stop with Dune, the first book, you know, that's kind of how it feels. It feels kind of triumphant,
Yeah,
and like
yeah.
this guy's been on, you know, the full Joseph Campbell, you know, hero's journey. But once you get to Dune Messiah, you're like, oh wait, he's Space Hitler.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. How many people did you kill, Paul? 60 billion? Okay.
Yeah, I feel like there's even a sense of fun in Lynch's Dune that's missing from the newer ones. Because the newer ones are, I think they're good, but they're very serious. They take themselves very seriously. Not that, you know, and David Lynch obviously takes moments of it seriously, but there are moments of levity to it, as there are, I think, to all of his work. His work tends to have a reputation as being dark and surreal, but I think his movies in general, with the exception of The Elephant Man, do have a lot of humor to them. Like, because he's got a great sense of humor, it seems like, in all the interviews that I read with him. Like, he's a funny guy and he likes to have fun. You know?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think yeah, to me, the second part of Villeneuve's Dune is much more successful for me personally than the first part, because, you know, for better or worse, most of the stuff that Lynch's movie does well is the first half of the story.
Mhm.
And it's really hard to top
Yeah.
some of those scenes, you know, and when I see them done by Villeneuve's cast, it just rings hollow for me. Whereas in part two, that's a lot of the material that Lynch didn't get to even delve into,
Yeah.
or wasn't interested in delving into. He certainly wasn't interested in the nuances of Paul being a piece of shit. Which
you actually said, I think in one interview I liked that you were comparing how Lynch how'd you put it? Lynch clearly likes charismatic leaders and Frank Herbert did not. And you know, and I thought that was a really interesting thing about how you looked at how Lynch portrayed him versus and I honestly I've not even seen the new ones. So so I'm that far out of the loop, but apparently not the case.
If you've seen the Villeneuve ones, then you know, like, that is the thrust of those movies. I would say it even goes a couple steps further into making it clear that, you know, what Paul is doing is wrong and exploitative, and actually sets the universe down a much darker path than it was on before he did what he did. And then, you know, and I mean, and so, some people would argue, I mean, certainly I've talked to film executives who would say this, you know, is that Dune should not be a movie. Like that the character itself of Paul is not the kind of character that an audience wants to take the journey with. I think what Denny did that was so brilliant is he knows that, and so he made Chani the protagonist.
Yeah, because Chani in Lynch's version, she's almost underused, really, especially if you've seen Zendaya's version of the character, who is a much bigger character.
I think Sean Young put it best in an interview I found that she did. She said, I went to Mexico for 6 months. I'm in the movie for 3 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. I mean, if it wasn't Sean Young, who we know from Blade Runner and whatnot, I feel like you would almost forget about her character at all in it, because she is so underused in it.
And I mean, and to be fair, in the book, she's not the best written character either. I mean, and I've talked to, this isn't just like me spitballing, like I've talked to, you know, female science fiction fans who don't like the fact that, you know, the last line of Herbert's book is think on it, Shawnee. We who were called concubine, history will call us wives. Like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
Are you
right.
also other things as well? Like yeah, like it's a weird way to end a book now. Even though like a lot of the way the women are depicted in the book are fairly progressive for the time.
Yeah.
You know, it is of its time. And I spoke to Villeneuve about that and he agreed. It's like, yeah, like you know, there are certain things, you know, that were okay then that are not a good
Sure.
way to tell the story now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially if you want, you know, people to if you want the whole audience to feel like they're a part of this.
Well, no, I just wanted to talk about too, the book itself.
Mhm.
I'm curious, like well, first off, one thing I thought was really interesting, you got into this because of, or where you first like really heard of Dune was from your dad.
Mhm.
You said, and I'm curious about, did you ever get a chance to bond with your dad over Dune? Has he been impressed with your Dune stuff?
I think so. I mean, yeah. I mean, he's always very supportive of me. Like, he's weird though. He's like, he he's read like all 6 Dune books, but I don't know if he ever even watched the Lynch movie.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
really?
So yeah, like it's like yeah, like there's certain things like that, and I understand that too. Like
Sure.
I'm a little like that too. I read the whole I read The Shining and I read Doctor Sleep, and then I couldn't get through like 15 minutes of Doctor Sleep the movie.
Oh, wow.
It just felt like a fan film to me, and I just like I couldn't do it. I've
Yeah.
seen 1,300 episodes of Dark Shadows. I could only watch 30 minutes of you know, it's like there's some things that are like that. Like it's almost
You just
like
hold them in reverence almost. Yeah.
yeah, and for me with Dune, like for him, Dune is all about the books, and for me, it's all about David Lynch's Dune. Like
Yeah.
that to me, like that's the cornerstone for this material, you know, for me because it speaks to me, and it's weird that it speaks to me because politically, I'm way more in Denis Villeneuve's version. You know,
Mhm.
like that's the one that's speaking to the intellectual part of my brain. But the David Lynch one is talking to my heart, and it's
Yeah.
talking, you know, it's feeding me with eye protein. You know, it's like it's just a beautiful, beautiful movie, and you know, in some ways, you know, kind of unsurpassed.
I'm curious about the process of this, that like you how do you decide this movie doesn't have enough information about it? I am going to do that thing. And like, how do you even start? Like, what sets you on that hero's journey?
Mm. Well, that's a great question because honestly, like the book I was hired to write and the book that I wrote are 2 different things. The book that I was hired to write was supposed to be like 150 pages, and like maybe have 2 or 3 interviews in it that would have made my publisher happy. And instead, I did like over 60 interviews. I did 3 dozen with the cast of the movie, cast and crew, and yeah, and it wasn't really until about halfway through the process, maybe over half, when it went from being this could be an interesting book to this could be the definitive book about Lynch's Dune. It was like once I got David on board, then it was like, okay, like now we really need to take this to the next level. Like it galvanized me to be like, you know, like, okay, like now I want to get Rafaela, now I want to get Kyle, now I want to get Sean and all the people that I couldn't get before and like really try to make this, you know, and sell people on this being the definitive sort of chronicle of the movie. And I think it will be unless somebody else out there wants to, within the next few years, interview everybody I interviewed. and then more people. I mean, more power to you.
I don't know.
But
There's many more people that you didn't interview
I
in
was
this
going to say,
book.
we kind of already did the ripping you off a little bit for some of your information for the podcast. But
yeah.
even then, there was still so much more that you couldn't get into a podcast episode. You got to have the
Yeah.
book. Like,
Yeah.
it's
I mean, and there were things that galvanized me all the way through the process, including like, you know, some of the cast and crew died, you know, like we
Mhm.
lost Dean Stockwell. Like I was in touch with Dean Stockwell's publicist like 3 weeks before he died.
Oh wow.
Yeah, like yeah, and there was a makeup artist named Christopher Tucker who
Hmm.
was literally like sending me emails like, "Oh yes, let's get on the phone in a few weeks. That'll be great." And then like he's dead 3 weeks later.
Ah, that's a bummer. Yeah, he did Elephant Man as well. Chris
Yeah, he did
Tucker.
Elephant Man, and a lot of his stuff for Dune was either unfilmed or uncredited.
Oh, gotcha. So, is that how when you were setting out to make this, were you able to, so you were able to get a few of the like cast and crew on board, and some others were kind of hesitant about it until you got David Lynch himself
Mhm.
on board, and then that was kind of the catalyst for everyone's like, well, if David's doing it, then I guess I should do it, kind of thing.
Yeah. No, it actually, I never intended on getting David at all.
Well, he's
'Cause
notoriously shy about talking about this movie in
oh
particular.
yeah, oh no, he doesn't like to talk about it at all. Like it
Yeah.
makes him sad.
Yeah.
And so like I wasn't going to do it, and then but I really wanted to talk to Raffaella De Laurentiis, who was the producer,
Mhm.
and who I think is a very underrated producer. Like to be a young woman in her 30s making just gargantuan, pop event movies like
Mhm.
Dune and Conan
Conan, yeah.
Barbarian and just all the stuff she was doing back then. Yeah, like I really wanted to get her, and because she was on the film even before David, and and she really kept it together and really made the machine run. And yeah, and so she told me I don't want to do it unless David does it.
Mm.
And I know she said that because she thought I was never going to get David.
Right. You called her bluff.
Yeah, so all it did was make me more like, oh, I'll get David Lynch, Raffaella De Laurentiis. Yeah, no, but and Rafa's been great, and she's been very supportive, and she was wonderful to talk to.
Oh, she's got some great stories in the book.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Dino is the name that Dino De Laurentiis is the name that gets brought up most often when people are talking about Dune, because he's such a giant in the industry, and he's a character too. Like if you hear stories about Dino, he's like a larger than life character. But Raffaella was she was there on set day to day. Like Dino would come in every now and then, right? And
yeah,
but
I would say Dino was more responsible for kind of assembling the film's budget,
right?
And, a lot of which came through foreign pre-sales and things like that. And yeah, I think he had some input. Like certainly, he was sort of very specific about how he wanted the movie to look brighter, for the sake of home video, because VHS looked really dark, and so like David wanted the movie to look much darker than the one that you've seen. Yeah, to the point that like one of the DPs said to me, like, this is not the movie, David. This is not how he wanted this movie to look. It was not supposed to be this bright. It was not supposed and like weirdly, the 4K that Arrow put out, I think, was graded slightly darker than a lot of the other versions that have been out on home video. I think that one's fun. That one's a little more interesting to watch.
Yeah, that Arrow restoration looks pretty fantastic. He wanted to do it in black and white originally, didn't he? Didn't he or at least play with that idea?
Yeah, he played with that idea for sure. I don't know if that idea would have ever come to fruition.
Yeah,
I mean, I've actually played with turning some stills from the film into black and white.
To see what it would look like.
They look beautiful.
Oh, I bet they would. I bet. I turned on the Godzilla -1 color last night, which I had not seen yet. I threw it on as I was like going to bed, and it completely transforms the movie. I mean, because it's it's not like somebody just put a filter over it. Like they meticulously made it look like a black and white film from like the 50s, and it transformed every image on screen into something else. It's a totally unique experience. So
I mean, and David, when I talked to him, sort of denied that he ever wanted it to be in black and white. He's like, no, Dune was always in color. It's like blue velvet. It has the word blue in it. It can't be in black and white. Maybe black velvet. So he's a funny guy.
Yeah, he is very entertaining.
I think about how many cuts that guy had to make, and then I also think you had like 700 pages for this book originally. How hard was that to cut up?
Well, it's just because like when I was writing it in Word, and I'd never written a book in Word before. So the book I turned in was 400 pages in Word. I
Mm.
thought that was going to translate to 400
Right.
pages. It did not. So I gutted it like 100 and something pages, probably more. And
Wow.
it made the book so much better because all the stuff that was cut was like the stuff that reeked of like academia. It was like
Mm.
lists of deleted scenes. It's like stuff you can look up on the internet.
Right.
Like it didn't need to be in the book. Like it's better that the book is just an entertaining ride, rather than like an exhaustive trunk full of information.
It's a very unique structure for a book like this because I've got my bookshelves are filled with like movie like history books and things like that. And I've got books that are like about the making of a movie, and I've got books that are oral histories, and this is sort of a little bit of both because
Yeah.
you'll for those who haven't read the book, you'll do a like a chapter on pre-production
Mhm.
and then a whole oral history also about pre-production where it's literally interviews with everyone possible that you could get a hold of, and then you'll move into production and do the same thing and post-production and even like the legacy of the movie and everything, merchandising, like everything. You went from really traced it from conception to post release and interviewed all the people involved, and I've just never seen a piece of film journalism that's structured quite that way, and it was a pretty cool experience, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, and I did that very purposefully. Obviously, I didn't know I was writing an oral history until about halfway through the book because you need a lot of people
Yeah.
to structure an oral history. But once all that started going into motion, I knew that I had to do it the way it is in the book because there are so many people who aren't with us anymore, like
Mhm.
Max von Sydow, or obviously Dino is a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there were going to be some people I wasn't going to get, like Sting and Patrick Stewart or whoever. But like, yeah, like, and I wanted everybody's voice to be in the book. So yeah, so like, that meant there was a place for the archive material, and there was a place for the new stuff, which I was doing.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's interesting because there are certain things like you mentioned, like the merchandising, which I feel like if you're going to do a definitive book about Dune, you have to have that chapter. But like if you're just telling the story of the movie, like that really doesn't need to be in there. So like
Yeah.
when we're working on the audio book right now. We're getting close to finishing it.
Nice.
It's been problematic. Um, it's been in disarray. But like the
Let's see what he did there.
yeah, but like I very deliberately abridged huge chunks of the book because I'm like, well, in audio form, it's going to be better just to tell
Right.
the story of the movie straight through and not have these little cul-de-sacs, and
Yeah.
like, and there are things that just won't translate well to audio, like there's a whole thing where like all these critics, modern day critics, are talking about the movie,
Hmm.
and that would just sort of stop everything dead.
Sure. Yeah.
Audio book. But in a book, it's great because
It's
it's reference material.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I didn't know about a lot of like the merchandising and things like that until I saw it in the book. And then I actually like after reading that chapter, I watched the Arrow Blu-ray 4K has a like a 25-minute, basically an episode of The Toys That Made You.
Mhm.
The Netflix show about the merchandising from Dune, and like they had everything. I mean, there were a couple characters that like I think the Gurney character never quite got made, and things like that, even though they had prototypes. And I had no idea there were ever like Dune action figures, and now it's my life's mission to hunt some of them down.
I remember I got a couple of them when I was a kid because I used to go yard sailing with my
Yeah,
dad. And they'd be mixed in with the Star Wars
yeah.
figures,
You want to know
and
the
I'd be like,
difference?
oh, I've never seen this Star Wars character
Yeah.
before. Sardaukar, okay.
They're shaped more like the WWE toys that I had when I was a kid. Like I feel
Yeah,
like the shape of the action figures, which makes even them feel even more nostalgic for me.
yeah, and then what's fun too about the book is that I got to do little cul-de-sacs with I call them cameos of like, you know, like, well, I'll get some name people that I talked to briefly about Dune. Like, I did talk to Simon Pegg, and I talked to Robert
Yeah.
Eggers, and one of the people I talked to was Patton Oswalt. And I'm like, oh, Patton Oswalt's got a Dune story, and
Yeah.
like, and he's just like, oh, I went to the toy store with my mom, and they had these shit brown action figures. I'm like, what the fuck is this?
Oh,
I know
man.
that with like, I assumed if somebody were to ask you like what stuff disappointed you in the process or stuff you didn't get that you wanted to, it'd probably be the actress that passed or something like that. Was there anything that you found out that bummed you out? Like a story you expected or like a myth or anything and you found out that's not true or anything like that? I'm just curious about that.
I don't know. There were a few things I debunked because, like, the idea that Sting was supposed to be naked in that shower scene, and then they very quickly got the winged speedo. It's like, no, Sting was never going to have his penis out in a PG movie.
And a PG movie is what they were shooting for,
Like,
right?
they shot it for PG, but the
Yeah.
PG-13 rating was invented a couple months before.
Oh, gotcha.
Well, I'm gonna stop searching the dark web now. I guess.
But I mean, like, you know, that's, you know, obviously there were some things that disappointed me. Like, I would have loved to talk to Patrick Stewart, mostly because I've talked to him before and he's great to talk to. But I didn't realize he was coming out with his own book at the same time.
Oh,
So
gotcha.
it's like, there were even some points where his people were like, well, maybe we can do 3 questions or something like that. And then it just fell through. And I think it's just because he had people who were like, no, just save it for your book. And
Right.
I get that completely. You know, that said, you know, like, you know, Sean Young was also working on her book and she still talked. But like, but no, but you know, that was that was a little disappointing. But honestly, I think all you need is, you know, a handful of actors to get the actor's perspective.
Mhm.
Like, I talked to 7 people who were in the movie, from the star, Kyle MacLachlan, to, you know, a little kid who has no lines in the movie.
Right.
And like, you know, and yeah, and so yeah, like, I think that gives you a pretty good spectrum, because it's like, the thing I tried to do that was more important than getting everybody was I wanted somebody from every department. So
Yeah.
you get a holistic view of the movie. I would say the only thing that was disappointing that I didn't get while I was writing the book was I really wanted that script for Dune 2 that David.
Oh, man. That would have been a get.
Well, no, I got it.
Oh, you did
But
get it.
I got it after
After
the book was
publication?
the book was in printing.
Oh,
And so I wound up writing it up for Wired.
oh, cool.
So there's a whole article in Wired, like, I discovered David Lynch's Dune 2 script.
Oh,
And
wow.
if you
Oh,
want to know,
I referenced that in the podcast actually.
Did you?
oh,
Yeah.
okay, great.
But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that script is wild.
Oh, I gotta go read it.
And yeah, and my article is fun too, because it's like most of the stuff that is in the book, which is a lot of the script, a lot of the script is just Dune Messiah, the same way
Mhm.
Dune is, a lot of it's just the book. But I talk about all the stuff that David added, which is nuts.
Oh, cool. Nice.
Like, I felt like I was high while I was reading.
It's the spice.
You know, another crazy thing about this movie too, this makes me think of for whatever reason, is that one thing we mentioned in the podcast, I'm curious your thoughts on, is how this movie impacted film history, even considered not not entirely successful, like you said, but you know, like the effects team that was originally going to work with Hodorowski, you know, it goes on to, like, a lot of those guys are in Alien, you know, they do Alien,
yeah.
and then Ridley Scott leaves to go do Blade Runner.
Mhm.
Had he not left Dune, he, you know, what would have happened there? You know, just that
Right.
there was a few interesting things like that. I don't know if you ever thought about that while you were doing this whole process.
Well, I certainly I've thought a lot about what David's career would have been like if this movie had been successful.
Mhm.
You know, I even talked to Kenneth George Godwin, who was on the set as the documentarian the whole time. And, you know, we both agreed, like, you know, like, the success of Star Wars and the success of Lord of the Rings basically destroyed George Lucas and Peter Jackson. Like
Mhm.
literally just like they're shells of a filmmaker now.
Yeah.
Because these things just took over their
They
lives.
consumed them. Yeah.
Yes. And it's like, and you know, if you're a fan of Blue Velvet and a fan of Twin Peaks and Mulholland Drive and all these masterpieces that Lynch has made coming off of Dune, just know those weren't just things he did in reaction to Dune. Those were a result of Dune.
Mhm.
You know, it's like he wouldn't have made Blue Velvet if he didn't have that relationship with Dino De Laurentiis.
Mhm.
You know, nobody wanted to make Blue Velvet even after Elephant Man. You know, Warner Brothers, who developed it initially with him, hated it,
Yeah.
hated it. And yeah, but Dino took the shot, and you know, and I think that's incredible. And whatever you want to say about Dino, you know, and you know, the guy had, you know, pluses and minuses, don't we all? But you know, he really stuck by David. And I mean,
Mhm.
Raffaella even told me, like, you know, my father only loved two filmmakers in his lifetime, Federico Fellini and David Lynch.
Wow.
It's interesting because David had to like or make so many, you know, edits, cuts, whatever with Dune. We were kind of dealing with that on the podcast. Was that more from like Universal, or was that Dino like
Well, we get into
causing?
it. I get into it in the book. I would say it's not as cut and dry as the Evil Studio and the good, you know, the good and honorable David Lynch. I think it was definitely a series of events beginning with David's inexperience handling a production of this size, and also, you know, putting a lot of resources into material that didn't wind up on screen and never would have wound up on. You know, that's on David. That's not the studio. And the fact of the matter is they had X amount of money at the end to do the effects and to do this and to do that. And it just wasn't there, you know. And then that's partly David's inexperience with a movie like this. And yeah, and I wish it was as cut and dry as Evil Studio, brilliant director. But it's not. Like that's just not the way. And that's also one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to actual studio executives for my book, because I think too much of writing about movies becomes that. It becomes too director focused. Like these are gargantuan fucking movies. Over 1,000 people worked on.
Yeah, it's a collaboration between
Yeah.
everyone. And I that makes me think of one story that I read where they were out in the desert shooting on location in Mexico, and David Lynch is like focusing on like a close up of somebody's eye, and I think Raffaella comes up and is like, "David, what the fuck are you doing? Like, we can do this in a studio. Like, we do not need to do this on location where we're paying hundreds of people to be here. Like, let's do this later."
Yeah.
And that goes back to what you're saying about he was an experience, and he was as best he could, he was trying to approach this the way that he did Eraserhead and Elephant Man, which were a little more DIY, especially Eraserhead. And you just can't do that when you're spending $40 million of somebody else's money. You know, there are other concessions that have to be made.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, and you can argue that David, I think he was committed to the material, and I think he genuinely had an affinity for the material. But he also told people, you know, right at the beginning of the shoot, like, I feel like a sellout.
Yeah.
You know, and and he was doing a lot of things to distract himself during production. Like he had
Little
an art
art
gallery
projects,
opening
yeah.
in Mexico. He was doing the Angriest Dog in the World comics. He was doing he was doing these weird fish kits.
Yeah, I've seen. I think
He
you've
was
got pictures of a couple of those, like the chicken
Yeah.
kit and stuff in the
He was
book. Yeah,
dissecting animals and
yeah,
writing weird captions, and yeah.
Well, I just wanted to ask, because we've mentioned it a couple times now about, you know, adapting the material and whether or not this adaptation was successful versus the new adaptation. And I'm a big comic book guy, and you know, I love to look at the adaptations, you know, how successful it is when it stays close to the material, or when you know, the filmmaker takes it and sort of makes it their own. You know, looking at Zack Snyder with Watchmen versus looking at Sam Raimi with Spider-Man, Chris Nolan with Batman. Like, do you have, and not to stray too far from Dune, but you've covered a lot of different pop culture films. do you have a gauge of like what's a good adaptation, what's a bad adaptation, what makes those things good or bad? I mean, honestly, it's art and art is subjective, but like, do you have a favorites? Do you have a top or a top 3, top 5 of your favorite adaptations that were done really well? And I mean, I don't want to stray into the negative, but do you have a worst adaptation, a worst 3, a worst 5?
That's a good question. I mean, just from the train of thought that you had, I mean, obviously, I think a great adaptation is The Shining, because like the material is good. The book is good. It's a pot boiler. Stephen King wrote a pot boiler, and he wrote a mass market paperback, and Kubrick transformed it into something else. He took it to another level. Yeah, that the way that movie plays on your fears, plays on your psychology, is pretty darn effective. And I think like it's one of the only horror movies I've seen in my life that gets more frightening the more I see it. I just keep finding these new layers to it. So a filmmaker that brings intelligent new layers to a work, to me, like that's a successful adaptation. It's because like as good as the source material might be, a film can always be better. I mean, like, and you mentioned Watchmen. Watchmen is sort of both, because I think Snyder understands what made the comic book work, and he understands the tone of the comic book. But then, you get things like, as soon as he makes a change from the material, like making Dr. Manhattan the source of the atomic blasts instead of the squid thing. The squid thing is unwieldy and it cannot be put into the movie. I would be the first to admit that. You can't put the squid in the fucking movie. It's too much.
It'd be a little
Unless
weird.
the movie is 4 hours long.
Right.
Squid. But by making it Dr. Manhattan, you're too closely tying things to Ozymandias. And the whole point of the squid was something completely random that would not tie back to Ozymandias. Whereas if it's Dr. Manhattan, it's like, well, Dr. Manhattan's working hand in hand with Ozymandias. Did Ozymandias have anything to do with this?
Yeah.
Or like changing just a little thing, like instead of it being Robert Redford running for president, at the end it's Ronald Reagan. It's like, well, that changes completely the whole point that the incident was supposed to make the world more liberal. Whatever.
Right.
And like, and those things are baffling to me. Those choices are baffling. And they show just like grasping at straws to try to make this into a coherent narrative. And that goes back to my earlier point, which is that, maybe Watchmen shouldn't have been a movie.
Yeah.
Maybe it was better as a comic book, and Alan Moore has said the same thing. And Terry Gilliam, who was originally going to direct it, has eventually came around to that too.
Yeah. I think that like when you're talking about adaptation, I do think it's like a one-for-one adaptation doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best version of that. Like it doesn't, just because you're adapting every single moment of a book or a comic or whatever to the screen doesn't, like, because The Shining doesn't, and The Shining it's my favorite horror movie, and Stephen King is one of my favorite writers, and Stephen King doesn't like the book or doesn't like the movie because it changes things from the book, but it gets the cusp and the feel of the book, and it's more interesting than any other more accurate adaptations, like the made-for-TV one that I think Mick Garris did. But like one that I always think of when you talk about adaptations is the Super Mario Brothers movie from the 90s, the Bob Hoskins one. Is it a great adaptation of the video game? No, because the video game doesn't have a fucking story. Like, there's no story there to adapt. So they did something weird with it, and I'd much rather watch that than the animated Chris Pratt one, because I think it's a more interesting watch.
That's a great point of comparison, because like the Mario Brothers movie that they made in 1993 is not a good movie, and it's not even like it's certainly not a successful adaptation of the material. But like I feel like like the animated one is almost the opposite problem, where it feels like you made a checklist of all the things the fans want, and you did it, and then you gave it to them. It's like, well, where's the fun in that? Where is the ingenuity in that? And there is none. And that's one of the problems, and that's why I love David Lynch's Dune so much, because like that, he made some, really big swings. Like, why is there a box with a cat and a rat that
that has to be milked?
Super has to milk. Like, why
why is there a pug?
Why is there a pug? I talk about that in the book. There is a reason for the pug. Why is there those weirding modules?
Yeah.
The weirding modules are not in the book. And I think they're really cool. They feel like they could have been in the book to me.
Yeah.
And they are also, as I talked about, an extension of David Lynch's own kind of ideology.
Yeah.
And which David agreed with me about. It's such a fun, fascinating movie. It's definitely I hope that my book has enabled a lot of people out there who maybe thought of it as a punchline to reconsider it and think of it in a little bit more constructive terms, because it's a little bit like the Venus de Milo. You have to appreciate what's there, not
right.
the missing.
So which movie are you doing next after Dune?
I can't tell you.
Oh, okay. But you are thinking about this. Okay. All right.
Yes.
I like it.
There's something percolating. And I don't want to say anything about it, but if I can pull it off, it'll be something.
Cool. Well, we look forward to it.
Yeah. I didn't want to just like, repeat myself. All right, like now let's do The Last Starfighter.
Yeah.
I swear to God, when I was looking at the stuff about your book, I was like, I should do this for like The Last Starfighter. If I could write a book, that's what I do.
Yeah, my friend Mike Ryan actually just did an oral history of The Last Starfighter.
The Last Starfighter. Oh, nice.
For Empire Magazine.
Oh, very cool.
That is one of my favorite. Like growing up, it was like the movie I just like watched over and over again.
Yeah, you would also just relish the opportunity to talk to Nick Castle because you're such a
and
Halloween guy.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Max, for coming on the show. Like, this has been really fun. The book Masterpiece in Disarray, you can get it pretty much anywhere, right?
Yeah, I would say if you want the first printing, you should pick it up soon because we're about to go into the second printing. The only difference in the first and the second printing is that beautiful shiny red foil that lines the pages.
I was gonna say it's a good looking book. That's you should want this one.
Instead of shiny red foil, it's gonna be shiny blue foil.
Ah, gotcha. Well, the
blue
shiny
and
red
blue foil.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book, and it is. I mean, it is a very nice edition because of the red foil is the one that I have, and it is one of the best looking books in my collection, but it is a really fantastic piece of film journalism and film history. So thank you for giving your insights into David Lynch's Dune for us today. This has been a lot of fun.
Oh, this is my pleasure, guys. And remember, may the hand of God be with you.
Do you think George Lucas took anything from that one? Max, do you have anywhere, social media or anything that you want to promote for our listeners? Websites or anything?
I'm on that cocksucker Elon Musk site. It's just my name.
That's what I'm gonna start referring to it as that as well.
Yeah, it's on that piece of dog shit site. He didn't own it when I signed up. Sorry. So I'm on there, and then I'm also on the slightly friendlier but still fascist Instagram. It's just MAXEVRY1, and that's much more focused on Dune stuff.
Okay,
it's mostly like Dune and like stuff I'm doing, like this podcast or other events and things and fun little bits of trivia. And so that's that. And then I have a website. It's just maxevery.com.
Cool. Excellent. And we'll put links to all those in the show notes on this as well. You can find the show, of course, at cinema_shock or at cinemashock.net as always. You guys got anything else?
No, we appreciate you spending so much time with us. This was
Yeah.
great.
Thank you
This
very
was
much.
fantastic. Thank you guys. Appreciate you having me.